For those of you that don't know me, I'm George Scorsis. I am the CEO of Liberty Health Sciences. You know, I embarked on this journey a few months back after looking at the Canadian marketplace. I come from Metrum, as Alan mentioned previously. I have expertise in regulated packaged goods, which I'll touch on a little bit later, but I always found the American market of most interest, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. But before I do that, who are we today? Liberty Health Science is one of 12 licensed producers in the state of Florida. We have 100% of the entity in the state of Florida. And it's an exciting set-off point for us as an organization. Why? Because it lets us get our feet wet. We really understand the marketplace. If we can really embark on Florida and be successful in Florida, especially in that state, we can be successful anywhere. But before I do that, what is important about us? Well, Liberty Health Sciences really uses a few platforms to evaluate opportunities, and you'll see them on the board. One of them is, first and foremost, that it's a medical state. We will only enter into states that are medical, first and foremost, and that's for a few reasons. One is because our product lines are medical. Some of the other innovation pipelines that we're working on are exclusively medical. Now, that does not mean if a state transitions moving forward that we won't participate. If it goes from medical to recreational, of course we'll participate. At that point, we believe that we'll have our supply chain ready and successfully adequate for the recreational platform. What else do we do? We also like highly regulated platforms or states. Florida being one of them, where they only allowed 7 licenses off the get-go. Now there's 12. We like highly regulated states that ensure the highest of QC standards, SOPs, quality assurance, because for us, we believe that we have the know-how to adequately be able to succeed in those marketplaces. And the other thing is it prevents competition. The other piece that we look at is states, unlike other groups, that offer unlimited canopy sizes. This is really important for us. First and foremost, our DNA is that we're cultivators. We're greenhouse growers. We like large footprints. So for us to participate in certain states that have restrictions, it doesn't allow us to be successful in our know-how. So we really look for those states, Florida being one of them. There's no restrictions on canopy sizes, and that's why we saw that as our first entry point. And then lastly, the 2%ers. So these are states that offer enough chronic conditions in the medical platform that would enable us to be commercially viable in these states. Florida, for instance, which I'll touch on later, some of the dynamics there is that it's a wide enough array of chronic conditions permitted that actually we believe it's going to be higher than 2%. About 30% of the population currently fits in to what we say the chronic condition zone. I'll touch on that a little bit later. So what are we and who are we? Well, for those of you that know Aphria is cultivators. Their expertise lies in 3 generations of greenhouse growing, whether it be kooks, tomatoes, or potted plants. 3 generations of expertise that was transitioned into cannabis. They've been successful in the Canadian marketplace, and we thought to extend that into the American marketplace, which is extremely important for us. So our expertise allows us to be the low-cost provider of safe cannabis, but also you layer on another aspect to our business, and that is the pharmaceutical aspects. One of the co-founders and CEO of Aphria is actually someone that comes from one of the largest nutraceutical companies in the Canadian platform. So if you come into our facilities, highly concentrated towards being a pharma level business, and you'll see that in Florida as we continue to evolve that business. So I touched on who we are, but at a glance, what do we have currently? What are our assets? So our first asset right now is that we have 36 acres in the state of Florida, and we're currently building out 56,000 square feet. We bought a very modest operation in Alachua County, and we're going to continue to develop that. Also, we have an application in place for the state of Ohio. We have an application in, and it's a pending application that we should hear news potentially in the first or second week of November. We already have an option on 136 acres, and we already have the plans and have surveyed the entire property for 125,000 square feet to accommodate the 50,000 square feet that we'll be flowering in. But let's look at the Liberty Health Science, our DNA, our spiral as we call it. Innovation is really who we are. If you come into some of our facilities in Canada, which will replicate in the US, it's really about automation. We've taken most of our knowledge from the tulip growing business. It's all about large-scale automation. But also, it's not just about automation within our facilities. We are looking at automation on how to provide products that are for medical purposes. This week, we announced an exclusivity with a product called the Resolve. The Resolve is an inhalation system that tracks time of day, altitude, temperature outside, how the patient feels following the inhalation. I know that all of them don't sound like they're important, but tracking big data will be extremely important for us moving forward, especially in a medical platform for both patients and physicians. Additionally, retail. Traditionally, we didn't have a tremendous amount of retail experience, but we are evolving to have a lot of retail experience, and you'll see that from our board. We will have 4 dispensaries up and running by the end of this year. By the end of 2018, we're going to have over 17 dispensaries operating. So we are accelerating quite quickly in these states. Additionally, the know-how, our operational experience. We do use the Aphria IP, the Aphria know-how, but we also use the Aphria Seed to Sale program. Nothing has changed in any of the states that we operate in, even if their standards are much lower from an SOP level. We still track and measure every single plant from seed to sale over 500 times before it hits a consumer's hand or a patient's hand in many cases. Additionally, science. We are working with the University of Ohio, dependent on our application being successful in the university. We have one with the University of Miami as well. So we are more science-based in how we are working with the states. And one other thing to mention, although we are Liberty Health Sciences, we have a licensing agreement with Aphria, and that is really important. So it's not just about the know-how, it's about the products that we'll launch in the marketplace. We have just signed an exclusivity with Mary's Medicinals in Florida, and that will be continued into some of the other states because we do believe in the wellness aspects of what Mary's offers in some of the areas such as topicals, lotions. That's really their expertise, but we think it really fits well with what our portfolio is. We also are prepared, as many of you know, through a partnership with Tokyo Smoke, for instance, that we can launch recreational products in regions that do transition from medical to recreational. And we also have our internal recreational brands. The ideology behind this is that we will launch recreational products in states that allow it, and then eventually be able to grow the know-how and the expertise to be able to transition that back to Canada. As you know, July 1st is the set-off point for recreational in Canada. And lastly, Alan spoke to our investment strategy. We are capitalized quite well, with Aphria owning 38% of the company. So let's move forward into our team. As Alan mentioned previously, I'm George Scorsis. My background is quite unique, I think, in terms of my choices of careers. As my girlfriend says, I'm the guy from Thank You for Not Smoking, because I have worked in regulated markets. I've worked in alcohol. I've worked at Red Bull, and most recently in cannabis. But I can tell you that cannabis is the area that I've enjoyed the most. You know, what has really assisted me in this role is working with the regulators on policy that can really help the industry. And truly, if part of my job is the commercialization, it's really working with the regulators on helping out how to build responsible programs, as we did in the alcohol industry. It's almost deja vu. And that is really my area of focus as we expand. My CFO is Rennie Gulliver. Rennie Gulliver has over 30 years of experience, and Rennie Gulliver comes from Dream REIT. He was the CFO of international activities, tremendous amount of M&A activity in his career, and has raised over $500 million. When we look at our board consists of many of the known figures within the space. Vic Neufeld, which is the CEO of Aphria, is the chairman of our team, and that really talks about the fingerprint of Aphria in our business, with John Cervini, one of the co-founders, also being part of it. But we touched on retail before. Why is retail important? Because we needed the expertise. Many of the Canadian organizations, we currently just do a mail order business, that it goes directly to doors. We've brought someone else on our board who's not only an investor, but also brings that expertise, which is Saria Private Equity. Aaron Saria has owned and operated over 3,000 outlets across North America throughout his career. He really has that know-how. He knows how to find locations. He knows how to run retail outlets. And that's the expertise we brought on to help enable us to be successful in states like Florida and Ohio moving forward. So what is the opportunity? The opportunity in the US, as we continue to see, is quite large, $7.3 billion. But we're not only going to participate in the base market, and this is exclusively medical, we're also going to work in the ancillary markets. What's important to note is, additionally, not only is it $7.3 billion, but when you take a look at the recreational opportunity moving forward, we see that it almost doubles. From 7.3 billion, it moves all the way up to 10.7 billion. We do make assumptions that we feel we're quite comfortable with. When states like Florida do go from a medical standpoint, we do think that they'll go recreational in the next 3 years potentially. So that is an opportunity for us. But in order for us to be successful in recreational, we need to have our supply chain in order. And that's why we're growing at the scale that we grow. So what is the US adoption of legal cannabis? Many of you have seen this chart. But when you take a look at this chart, the reason why it's important for us is what are the areas that we will play in or we will continue to expand in as Liberty Health Sciences. Again, I talked about medical, I talked about the 2% states, but I also talked about the highly regulated markets. This is really our sweet spot, the Northeast. Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Ohio, which we have an application in currently. But there's also other areas that we do like. Texas, 3 licenses, 26 million state. We like those states. Those are the states we want to go into, and they're completely medical. So let's go through a quick timeline, because many of the questions we get being a Canadian company is, are we ready for the American market? Okay, and you'll hear that time and time again. I think this is just a great visual for us to look at. Look at the rate of acceleration that states are either taking recreational or medical since 1996. Just look at the way it's accelerating. The train has left the station, and next year, it'll continue to extend. So what's going to happen from our perspective, from a regulatory framework aspect? Well, I think we have a few people who are quite familiar with the federal laws. It's still a Schedule I in the US. But when you take a look at sentiment from the actual consumer or patient, 60% of the population currently lives in a state that offers medical, 20% in adult use, 93% of the entire country supports some form of medical cannabis. How can you push back on that from a regulatory standpoint? But we still have some obstacles ahead. What's going to happen over the next few months is the Leahy Appropriation Amendment, and essentially this is going to be a time when most people meet, and it will be an extension of what we saw previously as a Robocker Act. If this gets approved, and we are quite confident that it will, again, it'll prevent the federal government from stepping in and using federal resources to prosecute at a state level. So this will be the one step-off point that'll extend for another year, and in another year, more states will continue to participate in the business. The next piece is the Meds Act. The Meds Act is really encouraging research from a federal standpoint on the benefits of medical cannabis. And that's really important because research will bring credibility to our industry. And we need to continue to push on those aspects, and we're here to support it as well. The Compassionate Access Act, which is a descheduling or a rescheduling of cannabis from a Schedule I to a Schedule II. And then also with most of us in some of the states we work in, we are working with the 280E tax law. We need to remove that from the business. We need to start operating like any other business would in the marketplace. The reason being is that we need the regulators to start having the input and be able to leverage the tax dollars that we will use from our businesses. Why? Because it benefits the community. It legitimizes our business. So we need that to go away. And that's currently one of the forums that we're pushing forward. And then the Veterans Equal Access Act, which is extremely important. Being from Canada, we see that the veterans are a major platform for us to help people with a safer alternative to cannabis. And we do see that the majority of our customers, or a large piece of our customers in Canada, are actually veterans. And this will assist us in having veterans participate in this industry as well. So let's go through a timeline of who we are, and if you can pull it all out. So in July, we acquired Chestnut Hill Tree Farms. That's since been transitioned to Liberty Health Sciences. Additionally, in November, we are quite confident that we'll get an approval for an Ohio license, but still, we need to wait and see. We will have 4 dispensaries open in December of this year in Florida, and I'll touch on that a little bit more in depth moving forward, because we are excited about embarking on retail. Additionally, we will have our phase 1 complete, which is 56,000 square feet in March, and we'll immediately move into phase 2, but we will work hand in hand. The more capacity we have, the more dispensaries that we open up. We will have another 4 dispensaries. Then in September, under Ohio state law, we need to have our first sale. Those numbers are quite tight, but we have already looked at the land, we have an option on the land, and we have the team in place. And then lastly, our further phases into Florida. So let's really do a deep dive into what Florida looks like for us. So Florida overview, why was it so interesting for us? We knew we needed to enter into the American market, but we knew that we needed to have a marketplace that is viable for us to be successful. We have investors that we need to work with, and Florida was one of the markets that we thought was the most interesting. 20.6 million people, one of the most populated markets in the entire US. Additionally, when you take a look at the qualifying patients, that means how many chronic conditions are currently permitted by the state and that can prescribe or provide a document for a patient to use medical cannabis. 30% of the population. As you know, if many of you have visited Florida, the reason being is, one, it's extremely aged. Unfortunately, with age comes ailments. And we thought that that was a tremendous opportunity for us to walk into. Registered patients, 200% over the last 3 months. It's accelerating at a rate that we haven't seen. As well, physicians continue to escalate quite quickly. The reason being is there's 2 bills that were passed in that state. One now permits physicians to see a patient once to provide a medical document. About 2 months ago, they needed to see them 3 times within a 90-day period. So quite prohibitive for every single patient. The other piece is for physicians. Let's face it, physicians are not educated in this space. They're also, through traditional education, they don't know enough about the endocannabinoid system. So many of them already have that thought on why would I enter this and have this for a patient as an alternative. Then later on, an 8-hour seminar that they need to do. Many of them said they just don't want to do it. It's recently changed to a 2-hour seminar, and as a result, we're seeing more physicians enter into this space. Again, 12 licenses in Florida. The interesting thing about Florida is it's a completely vertical market. It's one of the ones that we found the most appealing. So not only with your cultivation license are you able to cultivate, you're able to process, but you're also able to open up to 25 dispensaries in the state. Will we open up 25 tomorrow? Absolutely not. But we are on our way to get there. So I talked about the chronic conditions, and if you look in the state, take a look at what the biggest chronic condition is that we'd be prescribing for. Again, really talks to age, arthritic pains. So with that being said, the other piece that is extremely interesting is, and I needed to update this because another 3 licenses went live in Canada this week, but if you put a comparison in terms of Canada to just Florida alone, in Canada, it's roughly 1 license for 800,000 people. In Florida, it's 1 license for every 1.7 million people. So again, the opportunity is there, and that's why we used it as our entrance into the US. In terms of future plans for Florida, we are going to work on 3 platforms: capacity, 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 and then we'll move into dispensaries and patient count, because you need your capacity in order to fuel your dispensaries and increase your patient count. Initially, we bought our first facility at 14,000 square feet, 3 very small greenhouses on 36 acres that produces 700 kilograms. If you saw that patient count on some of the earlier slides, you'd know, without a doubt, that's not going to be able to fulfill with 12 licenses the need of the state. We moved immediately into 56,000 square feet. That'll be ready in the next few weeks, and we will start putting in our plants. Then we're going to go immediately, right after in March, to 187,000 square feet. We are already capitalized all the way to this stage. Additionally, why are we growing to that size? One of the successes we saw in Canada with Aphria was that they were successful in having adequate product that would allow them to sell directly to the patient through a retail environment, but Florida State has now just permitted us to be able to wholesale to the other licensed producers. So we're going to have a two-pronged approach. When we have access product, we're going to sell it to other licensed producers, and we're going to be able to use that as a throttle to ensure that we're always making the best use of all of our product. If you move forward, Alan. Patient count. What's interesting, if you take a look at our phasing, this is how we're anticipating the market to grow. But what's most interesting is by phase 3, we will have about 20,000 patients within our system. 20,000 patients will be buying through Liberty Health Sciences, and that's when we'll have 187,000 square feet. But that will additionally allow us to wholesale at that point. From a dispensary standpoint, we took a very, very different approach. It's my mom. So we took a very different approach. From a geographic target standpoint, we targeted 4 areas. General population, we overlaid it on where physicians are prescribing, as well adult lifestyle communities, which are very prominent in Florida, and veteran populations. So take a look where our first dispensary will be. In the villages. Who's ever been to the villages? You've been to the villages? Okay, great. So you know the villages well. Villages is what we call an adult lifestyle community. That was our first target spot for our dispensary. It's currently in construction, and it's going to be opened up in the next few weeks. From there, we're going to go into Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and Tampa, because Southern Florida has the highest level of prescribing patients. And then moving forward, we're going to go into some of the northern areas, such as Orlando, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, and Pensacola. Pensacola, again, high vet population. Tampa as well, with one of the larger VA hospitals located outside of it. I wanted to put this up there because we are changing the way we are doing dispensaries. We need to be physician-centric, patient-centric, and our places are not going to be called anything else outside of what we are, cannabis education centers. We will be CEC, and that will be our storefront in Florida. Any state in its immaturity, or in its infancy, excuse me, has a high level of education needed for patients and physicians. And this is why we did it differently. We did it differently in the sense that we feel that every single patient that walks in will have a lot of questions. It won't be a traditional retail environment where you have thousands of levels of bud and thousands of levels of vape. They'll be getting a medical document that will go to the state, and then they'll still have several questions. We're working with physicians to work within our facilities, as well as nurse practitioners, for a highly medical approach. Some of the more aesthetic visuals of our stores is you will see that with the exception of the top left, very, very little product will be actually shelved outside of using samples for questions where people can ask about oils, vaporization, encapsulation, and some of the other methods that we allow in Florida. So we move into, so that is Florida. We have also embarked on another state that we found tremendously interesting, and it's good to see fellow colleagues in the room that have also entered into that space. And Ohio is that space. That state is not too dissimilar. When we do the analytics on why Ohio is interesting, you can see that the marketplace is quite large, 11.6 million people. We also know that Ohio has been stricken one of the worst states for opiate use. And you can see that the chronic conditions that they're permitting in this state also allows for about 24% of the population to use cannabis as an alternative. What's interesting about this state is it's a 12-12 state with 12 what I call large-scale cultivators and then 12 craft cultivators. I really do enjoy this system, actually. I think it does give a different aspect to it. It is a 3-tier license. We are going for both for cultivation, processing, and dispensing. So what was it about Ohio that really made us interesting? We were looking at the state and we knew we wanted to enter into it. It's very close to our home base of Leamington, Ontario. It's right across the lake. It also has a very, very strong greenhouse culture. As we were looking, we were pursued by another group in that state called the Schottenstein family. The Schottenstein family is one of the largest property owners in all of Ohio State. They're also the owners of DSW Shoes, American Eagle, Albertsons, which owns Safeway. Very well capitalized and owns a tremendous amount of property. So they've come in and they're 49% owners of our business venture. What is really interesting about this is twofold. I think this legitimizes our industry. This tells us that people from outside of our industry are now coming in. Okay, there's no more this stigma that exists. I can tell you that a group of this nature, wouldn't enter it if they thought it would be harmful. So the other piece that it does for us selfishly is to be successful at retail, you need retail expertise and you need property. This is what they bring to us. So I just wanted to leave in conclusion. The US is an amazing space. It's quite large, especially as a Canadian who's been transplanted into the US. And what you see is just Florida and Ohio alone are bigger than all of Canada in terms of opportunities with less licenses. So this is the 2 initial areas that we're going to be working in. But I can tell you, as you saw in that, and without giving any forward guidance, as you saw that northeastern area, I can tell you we will be quickly looking at those spaces, either in an application or an acquisition format. And with that, I want to thank you and open up to any questions.
I'll start real quick because it sounds to me like Ohio, if you get it, is a better state than Florida, but you may disagree with that. It seems like Florida is very restricted. Is part of your enthusiasm if you think it's going to be easier to sell more products to more people over time as the laws change?
Do you mean in Ohio specifically?
No, in Florida. So it seems like Florida's your first effort.
Yeah. So
it's a tough state. It's great. A lot of things you said are great because it's limited competition. It meets your model, but it seems like there are a lot of restrictions on the medicine and the patients.
Yeah, there is. One thing about Florida, in the next few months, we're going to see us being permitted to sell both edibles and other disruptables, which we're quite excited by. In our facility build, what I didn't add there is we do have commercial kitchens being built, as well as a partnership with Mary's, which will allow us to have a full spectrum of products. Why that's important to us is a few things. It'll allow us to gain the expertise for when we need to go into Ohio if we are successful in Ohio. Also, that expertise flows up to Canada, where Canada right now is only a flower as well as oil state. So yeah, Florida is extremely exciting for us. One of the differences between the 2 projects is we acquired a license versus going in on a greenfield in Ohio. Greenfields for me are always the best because I can build it to the platform that I like. So a little bit of a different setup.
Yes, in the back.
I noticed in Ohio, if you get a license there, you're projecting a 125,000 square foot facility.
Mm-hmm.
How would you accomplish that? The limit I thought was at 25.
Yeah, that's right. You are, and that's all you can open up to flower. We're anticipating that we're going to build a larger facility and then strictly restrict that one area, the 25,000, to flower and not open the rest of the facility. What we anticipate and what we're working with the state on is we do believe that there's going to be shortages in the marketplace based on what their current forecast is. And we are suggesting to them, listen, permit us to build at a larger scale. We will comply with your regulations at 25,000. We get it. Let us put the capital for the rest that we can turn the switch on and then open up the rest if there are shortages. The last thing we want as an industry is shortages.
So you're not...
that won't be open day one.
As your slide shows, you're not really anticipating 125,000.
We will build to 125. We just won't open 100 of it.
George, Florida requires you to be a greenhouse, is that right? Or no? Or it just happens at
No.
all greenhouse?
Well, not all of them. One of the competitors has actually grown in a box,
Okay.
which is interesting. You know, for me, Florida is just such a conducive market for a greenhouse. So many sunlight hours. Humidity is a little bit more challenging in a state like Florida. Now, that's important to have the right cooling racks and genetics. Genetics are extremely important. We can't underplay what genetics are. We can get local genetics that are a little bit more resistant to powdery mildew and so on. But yeah, about 90% of us are greenhouse right now.
But in Ohio, you certainly aren't restricting. I would imagine you guys will be one of the few greenhouses. Is that right? Or are you expecting?
I actually expect most to be greenhouses.
Really?
Ohio has an extensive greenhouse culture. They have one of the best cultivation programs in their schooling. There's a tremendous amount of talent in Ohio that we are excited to work with, but I would imagine that a lot will go to a greenhouse.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So that's in your DNA. But what about on the East Coast? That's really where I was headed. So you have a lot of interest in these new markets opening up in the East Coast, but will greenhouses be conducive there, given the weather patterns?
Yeah, well, unless you get to some of the more northern regions, then that would be a little bit problematic. But you know, for the most part, we can regulate the environment indoor. But what we do is we do the right science behind it to understand if the outdoor environment will be conducive. You know, for us at Aphria, and I can speak on Aphria's behalf, you know, the reason why they're in Leamington, Ontario, what most people don't know, is the most southern point of Canada. It's actually more south than Detroit. Detroit is north of Leamington, Ontario, and it gets the most sun hours out of any other place in all of Canada. And sun really helps us. It helps our electricity costs. It helps a lot of things. We can use LED because we get that much. We don't need to use HPS in our facilities. So again, we won't jeopardize our know-how or our cost structure, but we'll definitely always be in greenhouse.
And then if you do have to move to indoor somewhere, if you really want to be in that state, is that something that you can put on the radar, or you just won't do that?
We've discussed having a hybrid. We believe at Liberty Health Sciences, it would be very difficult for us to maintain our cost structure as exclusively indoor. So we would do an indoor/outdoor. We need to keep in mind, cost structure is extremely important to us. And indoor does have a spot in the business. There's no doubt. You can definitely control your environment much better in many cases, but it does come at the cost of a higher cost structure.
I'm always curious about cost. You just mentioned cost. As far as like KPIs, do you guys have like a cost per gram, or and if so, like how do you guys exactly go about that? Because I know there's a lot of diversity, let's say, amongst that.
Yeah, there's no standardization. Yeah. So we look at cost all in, and when we say all in, and that's, I would say that the industry is somewhat, you know, I don't want to say there's manipulation, but there's different accounting ways that people look at things. You know, are you looking at all the way to flour? Are you looking at all the way to packaging? Have you built in all of your marketing, QA, QC costs? When we talk about all-in costs, it's when it hits the consumer's hand for us. And that's what we really look at, okay? We feel that that is truly the deciding factor, because you need to bake in what you've done with everything. You need to bake in your QA, QC, your marketing in many cases, right? Your shipping, your sales. So we look at that as our final KPI.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jordan.